Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is TheSketchMonkey here. I'm at Genesis of Littleton to have a look at something pretty cool today, and this is the GV60. It's a full electric EV, obviously, and this has the dual motors performance. So I think Genesis is really onto something here when it comes to the design. They've been around since 2015, and since then, they really nailed the design identity of their cars. And that is all thanks to Luke Donkerbolke, who took over the design department in 2020, the same guy who designed the Lamborghini Murcielago, the Lamborghini Gallardo, the Bentley Flying Spur, is now in charge of the whole Genesis lineup. You can definitely tell that this has a very clear identity, even though it's just been around since 2015. So what we're gonna do, you know the drill, we're gonna have a look at the front end design, the side, the rear, and the crazy interior, and then we're gonna take this for a drive. Before we jump into the design of the 2023 Genesis GV60 in this Hanauma mint color that we have here, let's talk about some of the spec and tech. So we have dual motors, one 160 kilowatt motor on the front and one in the rear. The total power output is 429 horsepower, but when you press this boost button that we're gonna do when we go out for a drive, you get 483 horsepower for a short period of time. You have a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, and the charging is 350 kilowatts. 0 to 60 in just 3.7 seconds. The range is about 235 miles. And the price for this, if you want this specific one here at Genesis of Littleton, it's going to cost you $71,000. Starting with the front end design of the GV60, this is based on the same platform as the Ioniq 5, and you have the EV6 as well. You're gonna see that when we have a look at this from a side view and the proportions of the thing. But I love what's going on here, specifically the two-line design. They look so good, and already, as I said, have a very strong brand identity in the front end. If you were to ask me if I were to choose the EV6 or the GV60, I am definitely going GV60 in this case. I love the design that we have here with the functional air curtains in the side. You have a big grille in the middle as well, and this has some cooling to it in the lower part. So instead of having the grille up top like we have on normal internal combustion engine Genesis, they moved it down lower to have the cooling for the battery pack coming in at the bottom part. We also have, as I said, these headlights, which are super cool to look at, almost like ice cubes, these cubes that we have. And what Genesis does very well is having their headlight unit being really small and really tight, while still having all the functionality inside of these headlights. So what I mean about these headlight designs here, you can see that we have 5 cubes inside of these two lines, and we also have some styling on the outline of these lines. For example, this line, I love that this goes in and connects with this line. Since this is a smaller car, you can have a lot more fun when it comes to the styling of the car, because it's not the big brother, it's not supposed to be stately. This is supposed to be a little bit more fun in the design, and I think they managed to do that with this design. 3 outline cubes up here, as you can see, are the indicator lights when you have the indicators on, like we have right now. But if you turn these off when the car is normally running as normal, these are the daytime running lights, and then you have the main headlights sitting in here. So these 4 bulbs here are actually the size of the entire, headlight function of this car. And I think the design is so cool, and how they managed to shrink those features down in the front end. Now, one detail here in the front that is a little bit annoying, but in a good way, because it's almost art, because art is supposed to invoke a feeling, and this little detail in the front end definitely invokes a feeling for me. That is this little cut that we have in the front end. This has a function to it. So this little triangle here actually houses the rear front mounted camera, but it's such a thin piece with these bars, and it just sticks down in such a small way that you feel like, is it necessary to have that stick down there? But in the end, I think it creates more identity for the front end of the GV60, and I like that feature, even though it would feel good to just cut this off and create just a straight line here. But when you look at the overall line flow in the front end, you have these lines in this little triangular piece actually connect to some pieces in the bodywork, and this color looks absolutely stunning in the sun with this metallic finish to it. So overall, I think it's a gorgeous front end, and I think Genesis is really onto something when it comes to design of their cars. So coming around to the side view of the GV60, and this is where you can see the similar proportions to the EV6, for example. It looks more like the EV6 than it does the Ioniq 5, even though they all share the same platform. And these door handles are open now because the car itself is open. There are so many cool graphics to talk about here. For example, the blacked out A-pillar that we have here, and then we have this chrome trim piece going here, and then someone sneezed in the design department and created this little V in the rear. It also follows all the way back to the very end of the car. It's a gorgeous side view. It doesn't have those typical EV proportions that you definitely see in the EV6, for example. I think the front end, where the A-pillar meets the body, it just looks more like a traditional proportioned car for a small crossover SUV. So what do we have when we talk about the wheels? This being the dual motor, the performance package of the GV60. What Genesis decided to do, just go big on the wheels, and these are 21-inch wheels. I love the design of these wheels. I think they have a very complex surfacing to it, but it breaks up the otherwise smooth body panels that we have on this car. And going 21, I think that was the right way to go as well. They're 255mm wide tires, both front and rear, and overall I think this gunmetal finish, it just looks super crisp. A couple of more details in the front end. For example, we have this silver cladding going around the wheel houses in the fenders of the wheels, and you see how far up it cuts into the side of the body. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of having this cladding around the wheel arches, but for some reason I think it works here because this is a crossover. They call it a CUV, but it is a small crossover SUV, so you want to have that ground clearance, and you do have a pretty decent ground clearance here, but this graphics definitely helps with raising the overall vehicle and the graphics of the car up even further. So looking at the overall proportions of the GV60, as I said, I think this looks better than the EV6 in the proportions. I think the graphics helps a lot with that as well, specifically the taillights and the headlights, but we don't have any sharp angles or lines in the bodywork, and this is typical for EVs these days, except for the Ioniq 5 that is sharp all over the place. And these door handles, as I said, open now because they're popped up, so the car is open. One a little bit, I'm not sure how to put this, but maybe a little cool, but same time maybe a little creepy, is that in this panel right here, in the B pillar, you have facial recognition, which means that you don't need any sort of key or any phone to open up the car. You can just put your face right there, and the GV6 will scan your face and then open up the car for you. Swinging around to the rear end design of the GV60, and all the smoothness and all the styling that you have in the front and the side comes back in the rear as well. I think, in my opinion, this is probably the best view for the GV60. I love this clean taillight design that has a resemblance to what's going on in the front end. You still have the side of the taillights connecting to each other, so both these elements have some sort of connection to each other with this body colored line going straight through them. And then you have the GV60 logo here in chrome, and you also have Genesis spelled out in the middle, in line with this line that goes through the taillight. One detail I love back here is this spoiler, this trunk spoiler that looks fantastic and also sends the car off in a very nice way. You have the camera, or the rear camera, mounted inside of this, right in the center. And this being black, I think it melts into the body, but it still gives the shape, looking at it from a side view, this nice send-off. And it has a very subtle upswing at the very end of it. So it looks sporty and it adds something to this design. And without it, I think we would have too much of these bubbly EV design. So this definitely helps out with the overall styling of the rear end. As I said in the introduction of the video, I think Genesis is definitely onto something when it comes to design. They're just stunning these days. Even the EVs, they make the EVs look very unique and very special, even though it shares the same platform as other EVs. Down here you have a I'm not sure if I would call this a diffuser or a bumper, but you have this same silver trim that we have on the side going up and sticking pretty far up here. You have the reverse lights being located right here at the very bottom of the car. You also have a reflector light here and some fake air vent here, which I think is fine because it creates a nice framing for the lower section where all the complex styling happens, and then have a section where it separates these two elements, the lower part and then the very clean and almost minimalistic top part of the rear end. Welcome to the interior of the brand new GV60 2023 model year, and in here we have a dual setup of 12.3 inch. You have that for the gauge cluster. You also have the same size for the infotainment screen, and there is some crazy stuff going on in here that I absolutely love about this car. For example, let's start with the center console here. First of all, you can see that this is floating. There's nothing underneath here, and this is the benefit of having an EV. You don't have a transmission that needs space under here. You just have a battery pack and the motors on each axle, and on top of this console you have this very cool a crystal ball thing going on, which when the car is off, it swivels and shows you a crystal ball with some LEDs inside of there. And then when you turn the car on, it swivels back and give you the driving options: reverse, neutral, or drive, or park. Super cool little design. I'm a little bit worried about how much is this going to cost when or if it breaks in I don't know how many years. Probably going to be a very expensive piece to repair, but who cares? It's a very cool design, so I don't care about that. It looks great. Down here we have the climate settings, and thankfully they are all with the physical buttons for both sides, the passenger and the driver, obviously. And you have very easy ways to adjust the climate control in here. You have these knobs here to go up and down in the temperature, and if you want to adjust the vent, you do that with the little screen that you have down here. So you have the vent, the fan speed is controlled by the screen, but the temperature itself is controlled by physical buttons, and you can also adjust where you want the air to come out from by pressing the animations that you have in the screen itself. Looking at these vents, very nicely integrated with some curvatures and some styling to it, but it's still a traditional vent. You know exactly what you want to do with these and how they function, even though they are stylized in a different way than most regular vents that we see. The integration here of the screen, I think it's decent, honestly, even though we do have a big curved dual 12.3-inch screens here. The integration of the screens itself feels decent. It has a nice base to it, and it feels like it flows pretty decently into the rest of the dash. You also have a head-up display up front with the speedometer and the speed limit shown to you. The regen braking is controlled on the steering wheel here by these two pedals, just like we have in the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6 as well. And the steering wheel design, it reminds me a lot of the Mini Cooper steering wheels. I think even the logo reminds me a little bit of that, but it looks clean. It looks pretty funky. You have the dry mode selector here on the left. You have Eco, Comfort, and Sport. And to the right, you have this Boost button, which I think it goes up to around 480 horsepower when you click the Boost button. So you get a surge of power for just a couple of seconds or so before it goes down to the normal 429. So very cool features. And you also have angles on the spokes itself. They're angled outwards, similar to what we have in the taillights, for example. So the taillights design philosophy comes back here in the steering wheel design. Overall, a pretty nice steering wheel. We don't have a third spoke down here, but that's okay. It makes it look a little more funky. Down here you have USB ports, you have USB-C ports and a 12-volt outlet and some more storage here, which is pretty deep. Going back to the center console though, you have the volume controls right here up top, which is a pretty unique position for the radio controls to have them in the center console like this. Usually we have them up here. And then you have this dial, which you can use to navigate the infotainment screen. And if we go into EV, for example, it's going to show you the range, and you can schedule the charging, and very cool graphics in here, because it's very easy to understand with the graphics here how much battery you have left and when you need to charge. Moving further down on this center console, you have heated and cooled seats, both for the passenger and the driver. You have heated steering wheel, auto hold if you want that on and off. I would probably go with that on in EVs because I feel it feels more natural. Then you have the camera button here, parking sensors, and the heat and cool seats for the passenger. You also have wireless charging right here, so you slide your phone into this little slot here where the wireless charging is, and opening up the center console storage is a very small compartment, but it also is a pretty small car, so it doesn't really matter that much. You also have two cup holders back here. Looking up in the roof, this is a pretty cool integration of a sunroof, because it splits in the middle. So you have, it doesn't slide backwards or forwards, it splits right in the middle. And it's a very, I don't think I've ever seen that on a sunroof design before. So again, Genesis coming up with some really cool and unique design ideas for their cars, and it extends to the door panels as well. Have a look at the speaker that we have integrated in the door handle on the passenger side, while on the driver's side here, this is how you control the mirrors, for example, and adjust them up and down, side to side, and so on. And it is just beautiful, this integration of this piece. They didn't just put a couple of buttons here. Instead, they made it nice and beautiful. And this is exactly what I want to see in specifically more EVs today have some passion for the interior design and the exterior design. And I think the Genesis GV60 is probably, I would say it's probably the best EV right now when it comes to car design and styling of their cars. It looks fantastic both inside and out. Having a look at these seats, you have these diamond stitching on the seats that comes back in different parts of the car. I think they look great. You can also adjust the seats on the sides of the seat. So if you're sitting in the back and you want to adjust this seat, for example, you just have to press the buttons that are on the side of the seat itself. All GV60s come equipped with the Bang & Olufsen sound system, which is pretty nice. And last but not least, you do have a sliding, not an opening, it's a sliding glove box, another detail that is pretty unique for this car. So with that said, we talked about the front end of the interior. Let's jump into the back and let's see if I can fit behind my own driving position. All right, so jumping in to the rear seat, and this is my driving position. I'm 6'1", and I fit pretty comfortably back here. There's no problems at all. It's not a lot of leg space here, but there is a ton of roof space, which I'm surprised by, because have a look at this sloping roofline that we have in the back. So headroom is no problems at all, but I would probably want to move my seat forward just a little bit. You have some very nicely integrated vents back here. This is a car that, I don't know, it just feels more upscale than what you're paying for the car because of all these small details and the quality of materials. Then you have a nicely integrated cup holder right here in the door, and the beautiful buttons on the door itself for the window and to lock the door, and the heated seats that you have back here. Is just a gorgeous interior overall in the Genesis GV60. Down here in the middle, you do have two USB-C ports to charge your phones. All right, guys, setting off in the 2023 GV60 Genesis, and I love this design. This is one of these designs that I kind of feel like I'm doing the environmental service just driving around this so they can have a look at this beauty, specifically in this color. The interior here, I really like the layout of these double 2.3-inch screens. It feels good. One detail though is that this steering wheel, even though it is adjustable, power adjustable, it's still gonna cover up the corners of the gauge cluster, the corner of the speedometer, for example. Details like that that would maybe bother me after a while. Well, let's put it in sport here. Let's see where the drive modes are right here. So let's put it in sport. The gauge cluster turns red, and this is a quick car. I want to put it in max region also to see if I can do one pedal driving, which it feels like I can. When I let off the gas, it really slows down, similar to a Model 3 or any Tesla if you've driven those. Let's take a right turn here and see where this road goes. I'm not familiar with this area, so we're just driving around a little bit here. Yeah, it's definitely quick, that's for sure. But the region is not as good or as strong as I would like it to be, because you really need to step on the brakes if you want to brake properly. You can't just do one pedal driving when you're doing sporty driving, which I feel I can do in my Tesla Model 3 Performance. We also have some cool noises. I'm not sure if the camera is going to pick this up, but I think it's the same noises that we have in the EV6. Let's stop for a second and let's floor it, and also let's press the boost button to get 480 horsepower instead of 430. So let's go. Whoa. Do you hear that noise? It's like that button that you have in Knight Rider, in the Knight Rider car. I can't remember the name of the button, but when he jumps, it feels exactly like that. It just takes it to another level in the pull of this EV. Pretty cool. It's really fast, this car. Let's make a U-turn here real quick, and the turning radius of this thing is decent. It's really good because it is a pretty short wheelbase, probably the exact same turning radius you have in the Ioniq 5 and the EV6. Overall, comparing this to the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, it makes some very strange noises, this car. But comparing these three cars, this is going to cost you a little bit more, but I'm willing to pay that price if I was in a market for one of these three cars, just for the simple reason that the interior feels so much better than those cars. I've driven both those cars. I just like the styling of the interior that we have here, and it feels like the designers put in just a little bit more effort into making this a really nice interior, and I really appreciate that. from the Genesis designers. Absolutely fantastic. Exterior as well. The exterior design, clearly Genesis. There's no mistaking this for anything else than a Genesis when you're driving this or when you see this out on the roads. I do like the head-up display as well. It's clear and it's sharp, and it gives me the speed limit and the speed I'm doing, and I personally don't want any other information in a head-up display. I don't want it to be too cluttery. One detail that I do love that Genesis put into production is this little swiveling ball here. I think it's such a cool little design detail. It's a bit of a gimmick, but it makes for the interior to feel a little bit more interesting than just having a normal dial for you know, a drive, neutral, and reverse. It just adds a bit more excitement to the interior of this car. Huge thanks to McDonald, Hyundai, and Genesis of Littleton here for providing this car for me to review for you guys today. If you're into this car or any new Genesis or Hyundai, make sure you check out McDonald Hyundai here in Littleton, in just outside of Denver. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.